Welcome everyone to 2024 legislative session here in Ways and Means. Glad to be back here with all of you in this tiny room so close together on video. So we have we have a new staff person and then we have someone who's moved into a new position. So I thought it would just be nice to have Kirby and Chris introduce themselves so everyone can know them. As you know, Abby had stepped down and actually moved over to the tax department. And we are really lucky to have Kirby Keaton here as our new main attorney working on tax issues. If you want to like come sit in a chair or something and just, we can all go around and introduce ourselves and welcome. We're really, really glad you're here. I already feel like you're doing a fantastic job. I'm really excited to be working with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be here. Doing this testifying is really, really fun for me. I'm new, of course, so I think if there's going to be hiccups and things, but I just want you all to know that I want to work really hard for you and that's my big motivation is to help you.
And I don't know if everyone saw your bio, but you came over you've been working at the tax department for a long time, so you're familiar with tax law, and you actually clerked here, right?
Yeah, about 11 years ago, I was a law clerk here. First job out of law school. Then I worked for the courts for a real short amount of time. And then I've been at the Department of Taxes for about 10 years, doing all sorts of legal stuff, working on like this or that, across the years. It's a lot different than this though. So, like I said, there's still a learning curve here, but I do have 10 years of Vermont tax experience.
I think we're really lucky you landed here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's all introduce ourselves. Bill, you want to kick us off?
Bill Canfield, Fairhaven.
Julia Andrews, Westford and Milton.
Yeah, from Scrappsbury.
Jim Maslin, Deptford North, Sharon Stratford.
Scott Beck from St. Johnsbury.
Kirk Taylor from Colchester.
Peter Anthony, City of Barry.
Carolyn Brannigan from the town of Georgia up in Franklin County.
Carol Odie, the far north end of Burlington.
Carl Emerald, current Orange, Washington, Washington.
Thanks. That was really like, anything else? I just wanted to have a quick little introduction and it's awkward because we're on Zoom. Yeah.
I was gonna, where'd you come from, how'd you get here? And you basically explained that.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'll see you tomorrow for like more of the real thing.
See you bright and early tomorrow.
Thanks. And Chris Roop, who everyone's familiar with, has moved over to a new position. So just wanted to give a hello and welcome to you in your new spot.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal Office. I have had the great pleasure of being in your committee last time, so you all don't need to introduce yourselves. I know you all pretty well, but for those of you who don't know me that well, because I haven't spent that much time in the room, I got hired in November of 2020 in JFO. I'm a Philadelphia transplant. I worked for the now former mayor of Philadelphia for a while until I decided to move up here and, start a new relaxing chapter in my life. For the last 3 years, I worked for primarily in transportation. So I spent most of my time on the other side of the wall over there and also worked on pensions and OPEB and other fun issues. So fortunately, we hired a new analyst who just moved here from Colorado named Logan Mooberry, who will be taking over the transportation work. So I'll be sort of helping him with that through crossover, and then you'll be seeing a little more of me. But for right now, I oversee the revenue team, who you all know, Julia, Pat, and Ted, as well as Sorsha. And they're all extremely brilliant, talented, smart people. And it's just an absolute privilege to work with them every day and to work with all of you. So I'm happy to be here, happy to serve you all for the rest of this session. And whatever you guys need from us, just let me know.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to dive into the topic of education finance, starting with the December 1st letter. We are going to spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of time on this any year. We're going to spend more time than usual on it this year. As I'm sure you all know, we're experiencing sort of a perfect storm of legislative changes and education spending needs and property values and all these things all coming together to cause quite a striking situation that we are going to talk about now with Julia. who has done so much work in the last few months to get ready for this session. So thank you, Julia. So we're gonna, every Tuesday afternoon, we're gonna spend the whole Tuesday afternoon on education finance issues. So this first day is really like a level setting about the December 1st letter and the Ed Fund outlook. And then we're gonna dive deeper onto other issues to understand what's really going on and why we're in the situation that we're in. And if there's anything we can do about it. Floor is yours.
Great, thank you. For the record, I'm Julia Victor with the Joint Fiscal Office. Great to see all of you again. Hope you've had a restful time off session. Just diving straight on in here, the chair has asked me to come in and discuss the December 1st letter. So there are 3 documents posted under my name on the committee's website. Don't know, would you like me to?
I think sharing the outlook or the annotated outlook.
Sure. Would you like me to share my screen?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Let me just log in to the Zoom. While this,
You're on screen committee before.
I know. I think near the end of last session, we moved to a sharing the screen so we could all have a joint experience and our eyes were more focused on our speaker.
And our listeners could follow along.
Yes.
great.
Getting back.
Yeah, no, getting back in the swing is a lot.
This is my first testimony of the session. And so I'm also getting back into the swing of things. So before sharing my screen, I will just let you all know that during the off session, I put together sort of an annotated guide for the Education Fund Outlook that really spells out line by line what it means, where those numbers are coming from, and how to interpret them. So this is posted under my name on the website, on your committee website. It's also posted on the JFO page. So I'll just pull it up just so we can sort of level set and know what that document looks like. And it's really supposed to serve as a resource as you're interpreting. Oh, don't want to show my face. I want to show my screen. Interpreting the Ed Fund Outlook. Right, so it's looking pretty small. I'm just going to get a little bit bigger. So essentially what we're looking at here should look very familiar to members of the committee. As we reflect on the yield bill last year, we look at that. We look at the Ed Fund Outlook every year to say, you know, what is the status of the Ed Fund? What are we seeing? What are all of the different things that are happening within the statewide Ed Fund? So this is the annotated guide, and it's really very similar to the Ed Fund Outlook. It has the same lines that the Ed Fund Outlooks that we look at have, and then it also has some relevant notes and description about what each line means, as well as how to interpret those numbers. So that's on your committee page under my name. I think maybe it's titled Annotated Guide to the Ed Fund Outlook. And so I'm not going, unless there's specific questions that the chair would like, I'm not going to walk through it line by line. Or would you like me to?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I mean, you're going to walk through the real Outlook line.
Yes.
So I think this is just a resource, so people know this resource is here.
Yes, exactly.
And I would encourage members of this committee to share this resource with people who are not in this committee, because it's really cool.
I think everyone already knows this stuff.
Yeah.
That was just a joke. Really?
Yes, that was intentional. Thank you. Before diving into the Ed Fund Outlook and the December 1 letter, I think it's helpful to level set a little bit about what the December 1st letter is. So the December 1st letter is, as you may recall, is really a ministerial task. It is spelled out in statute how the modeling needs to be done. So it's a consensus modeling exercise that's conducted by JFO, as well as the tax department and the Agency of Education. And really what we have to do is take the best available data, which is being updated every day as we lead up and past town meeting day. So we take the best available data at the time, and we have to solve for the yields and the non-homestead rate if all of the average bill changes were to be uniform. So that's across the homestead, the non-homestead, and the income class. So this is really a starting point for policy deliberations. And as the session continues and we have better data available, policy decisions are made. Both the data and the assumptions that are used in this modeling will be updated and then reflected in future Ed Fund outlooks. So with that intro, got the Ed Fund outlook here that reflects the December 1st letter. So it came out on the 30th of November, but it's colloquially referred to as the December 1st letter that has all of these modeling assumptions. So just diving right in, this reflects best budget estimates from Agency of Education, estimated growth in grand list, estimated long-term weighted average daily membership, estimates for necessary appropriations, estimates for most things. We'll be seeing updates to a lot of these numbers, or some of these numbers, when we have the updated revenue forecast that's coming in January, and as the legislature deliberates policies. So with all of these considerations in mind, we can look at what the December 1st modeling shows us. So we're looking here at fiscal year 25, the forecast. So starting out, looking at lines C, D, and E, you'll recall that these are the property yield, the income yield, and the non-homestead rate. So that's what's set annually by the legislature in the yield bill. You'll also see that these yields correspond with average tax rates for homestead property and the household income, which is used to determine the property tax credit. This is average because, as you know, they vary by district based on local spending decisions. It looks a little bit different this year in lines F and G, and that's because this year in fiscal year 25 is the implementation of the new pupil weights that were passed in Act 127 of 2022. So now we're looking at a different way of weighting pupils. We're no longer going to have equalized pupils. We have long-term weighted average daily membership. So we're carrying both numbers so you can have a sense of what's happening in terms of pupils in the state. We see that the average bill change compared to the prior year across all three classes is 18.5%. It says uniform here because that's a uniform average bill change across all three classes. We see that the statewide education spending growth estimate from the tax department that's from the Agency of Education, is 12%, and that the education grand list growth is 14.3%.
Can you talk about how happens education spending growth?
The process of determining that number? Sure. So as you know, most school budgets aren't voted until town meeting day. Most haven't been warned yet. So this is an informal estimate based on what folks at the Agency of Education are hearing on the ground, conversations that they're having with these business managers. But it's not reflecting budgets that have been set because those budgets haven't even been warned, much less voted on.
Just clarifying question there. Are they conversations or are they reviewing draft budgets from business managers in all the schools? Like, is it?
I would have to defer to the Agency of Education to talk in specific.
And they're coming next week.
Does the annotated version of this give specifics on where the 18.5 comes from?
So the annotated version is really like a bigger picture. It's not speaking specifically to this Ed Fund outlook, but just how to read the Ed Fund outlook in general. So the answer is no, and I can speak to the 18.5% if that's helpful. Sure. So the 18.5% is reflecting a number of factors that are happening in the education fund this year. So we do see, so the tax commissioner attached to the December 1st letter talks about a number of pressures that are impacting the ed fund and the growth in average tax bills. So the letter cites things like inflation, increases in salaries and benefits, school construction costs, growth in education spending. So we do see that education spending growth, for instance, is 12%. So that's a contributor to the 18.5%. We also know that because the education fund is different than the other funds, right? So the property taxes are set to make sure that the ed fund is in balance. So we take how much money is flowing out of the education, needs to flow out of the education fund, and we take out the non-property revenue sources, and the remainder is what we need to make up with property taxes. So we have to take into account what are all of the monies that need to be paid out of the education fund, as well as the performance of the non-property tax revenue sources. So if the appropriations are growing at a faster pace than the non-property tax revenue sources are growing, then the property taxes need to make up a larger share.
But specifically on, like, the difference between the projected 24 and the 25 is not 18.5%, right? I mean, I'm trying to figure out which numbers go into that 18.5 specifically. Like,
so that's a culmination of all of the revenue sources in the education fund, as well as all of the appropriations that need to be paid out of the education fund. In addition.
Wait, let's go back up to.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, because you can maybe understand my misunderstandings. I was looking at that as average percent bill change compared. In other words, if I looked at the change in the property taxes in 24 and 25 from the various levels, I would see an 18.5% change. But that's not what's really happening, right?
I believe that you are interpreting that correctly. So the 18.5%, this number is saying that keeping in mind all of the assumptions that are going into the modeling, the average bill change is going to increase in FY25 compared to FY24 by 18.5%.
It's my understanding of what I see. It's not the rate that's changing, it's the bill that's changing.
Exactly.
That's my misunderstanding. Okay, good, thank you. I understand.
And I think that's a really helpful point. That's a misunderstanding I've been hearing a lot in conversations. That a question I have received a lot is, you may recall that Act 127 has a 5% cap of rate. So the question that I've been hearing is, well, how can there be an 18.5% average bill increase if rates are being capped at 5%? And what we're seeing is, well, rates are being capped at 5%, but the base is also growing. The base is estimated to grow by 14.3%. So when we think about the growth in the tax rate and then the growth in the base combined, those are giving an 18.5% increase estimate.
So the tax rate goes up a little bit, but because the grand list went up a lot, or those other changes, that makes the 18 goes on to all and becomes the 18.
Exactly.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
In terms of, the base, is that a reflection of additional housing build and also increasing property values overall?
So the 14.3% is primarily talking to the value growth. We do include in the modeling, we call it sticks and bricks, like what's being built in the state of Vermont. And you can think about them as sort of being two different factors at play, right? The more properties that are being built, that's expanding who needs to have an increase in bills, whereas the value is seeing an increase in tax bills. So it's capturing, the modeling is capturing both.
Okay.
Julie, just a quick question on the sources. So those revenue projections
Let's
there.
go through the sources one by one. I think we haven't gotten that far yet, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Sorry, skipping ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. It's a good segue, actually. Or not.
What? I don't know if now is the right time or not, and it's maybe more of a Brad question for you than yours, but in terms of the 5% cap, do we have a sense at this point about how many schools are expected to exceed that 5% cap? And how much of those were underweighted or overweighted schools, and what's the total cost of making up the spending beyond the 5%?
So I would say yes and no, in the sense of the preliminary modeling did include capping of the homestead rates. We saw that the majority of school districts did receive a 5% cap of the homestead rate in the modeling. That being said, these are not the budgets that have been voted, so I don't know what it will actually look like when budgets start being warned.
Do you have like a percent number?
I don't off the top of my head, I can get back to you. It's the majority. So somewhere in the above 50%, but not all.
And we'll have a deep dive on this. Yes.
And so the other piece that I would mention on that is getting to the second part of your question was, how much does that cost and where is that cost falling? The modeling requires that cost falls uniformly across all three classes. So the homestead rates that are not being capped are picking up a portion of it. The non-homestead rate is picking up a portion of it. And then the property tax credit is also picking up a portion of it. That's a policy decision. And that's the requirement that's spelled out in the December 1 modeling. Okay, so moving on from the summary lines. We get into the sources section. So some of these numbers should look relatively familiar if you've been following this since the July revenue forecast. So we see lines 3 through 8 are reflections of the non-property tax revenue sources. This comes from the economist's revenue forecast, which is consensus forecast from administration and legislature, and is updated twice, once in July and once in January. So we'll be getting new numbers in, I guess it's January, so later this month for those non-property tax revenue sources. Lines 1A, 1B, and 2, this is referencing property taxes. So we see the homestead property tax is estimated to raise $789.3 million, and the non-homestead $924.9 million. And we also see that the property tax credit, which is considered in the outlook as a negative revenue, it's a tax credit of $158.3 million. And you'll recall that the property tax credit is on a lag. So this is reflecting the FY24 property tax credit. So this number 158.3 is not going to change with the changes in the yields this year.
I was surprised when I looked at that meals and rooms and sales and use weren't down more. That seems like it's a steady curve upward rather than us being on the other side of a bubble. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I will be interested to see what the economists come out with their forecast in January. There's a lot of things that they'll be factoring in, impacts from the flooding that we've seen, as well as, just the economy in both the state and the country as a whole.
So line 1B, that's the property tax credit. That's the money that people get back, but they don't really get it back. It's a credit to the amount of money they owe to the town, right? So I'm noting here, let's see, what year is this? FY '23, last year. That was 163 million. Then we went to 155 million, now 158. Why the big drop in money credited to these tax bills? Why aren't we back up there when spending has increased?
Yeah, so the property tax credit, as you said, that's the tax credit that's against the homestead property tax liability that the taxpayer owes to the state. It moves through the town, but it's going to the statewide education fund. Interpreting these lines is a little challenging for a couple of reasons. These are estimates that are reflecting the prior year. So we're seeing, for instance, the 163.7 property tax credit in FY '23, but that's reflecting the income yield that was set in the prior fiscal year. So it's always on a little bit of a lag. We're also seeing changes in the property tax credit as a reflection of primarily what the legislature has set as the income yield in conjunction with the homestead yield. So you'll recall that both of those yields are being set, which are determining the overall liability and how much tax credit a homestead property taxpayer will be receiving.
Say that again.
So every year in setting of the yield bill, there's the homestead yield that's set and there's the income yield that's being set. Those don't necessarily need to be set so that the average bill change for both classes is uniform. So that's a policy decision. And it's also going to be dependent on the property taxpayer, their income, and their homestead value. So it's moving in this sort of way as a reflection of both prior policy decisions of how to set the income yield in conjunction with the homestead yield, as well as incomes and homestead values across the state.
You know, I always try to step back when looking at this chart. And the chart has improved over the last 18 years that it has lived. But I try to step back and look at the big picture. What does it really mean for the Vermont economy? What does it really mean for the property tax payer and the homestead owner and the owner too? But it has always bugged me that this is red. It used to be just a negative. And that bugged me too. But because people like me who are looking at this, it takes a while for this to sink in, you know? And so you look at the negative and then you look at the red, and it still takes a while to realize that this is not good for the overall taxpayer. This is money that we're paying back to some people that other people don't get. So some people are paying more than what they really owe because they're making up for this 163 or 155 or 158. So it's hard to put this all into the soup and really understand what's happening here. And Mark, what's his name? Perot. Mark Perot and I used to have fights over this, friendly fights. Janet would kind of sit there and, you know.
Well, that's how I'm feeling right now. It's actually like that.
Yeah, so I'll shut up.
Well,
But you get my picture.
I think it raises an interesting point. This maybe is what Mark said. I don't know if it's what he said, but what I would say is that it's showing up as a negative number because it's really being considered as a negative revenue, so to speak. It is a tax credit, so it does need to be paid for. another way that it could be interpreted, which make more intuitive sense, would be to add lines 1A and 1B together and say, okay, what is the overall net homestead property tax?
Yes, that would do it. But then, there's always some people like Scott Beck who want to know how much money we're giving back.
Representative Beck, do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say is we have had some conversations about this over the year, and I don't ever remember where 1A and 1B were together as one line. It's been like that ever since I've been here. I think there is an argument to be made for consistency, because in line 2, we're not telling people how much is it being collected because of current use. That current use deduction is built into line 2, and we're not showing that to the policymakers or the public. So I'm not saying we need to make any changes, but if we were to make any changes, consistency would be nice.
Absolutely, a good point. Yeah. And something that most people don't consider is stuff like current use.
Representative.
I would like to see current use broken out of that. I think that's something, going back to the thing that you said in the beginning, Chair, said, if there's anything we can do about it. Well, just to know that, and there are many levers on this piece of paper. So I'd like to see what that looks like. So if we can see that. And the other thing is, I've heard you say several times, not just this year, is we have a policy choice about how we set the rates for the homestead, the non-homestead. So I'm wondering, if we could see some numbers run for if we let those deviate by 1%, 2%, 3%, and what kind of revenue would come in if non-homestead went up by 1% more than it is now, or 1% more than the homestead. That's a lever in this whole thing. So how do I do that?
I think we're going to probably be doing all of those things over the course of the next couple of weeks. So you can just have them because you said it. Yes.
In years gone by, this committee used to mess with the two different rates. And it was as much a political choice or, personal inclination, inclination, we wanted to see this versus that. And we tried a number of years back to try to have them move, not necessarily in lockstep, but so that we weren't messing with things for our own benefit. And so it'd be good to see the numbers that you propose looking at, but I'm hesitant to commit to anything quite yet.
Oh, I think.
No one is committing to anything today of any kind.
It's the first day, come on.
There's also option, there are so many options on the table for levers, and they all have real world serious implications for them. So I want that public service announcement, probably not for people in this room, but anyone watching from somewhere else. The non-homestead rate is not just second homes. It includes all rental. I know everyone at this table knows this. If anyone's watching from home, it includes your deer camps, but it also includes all rental properties, non-commercial properties. It's just anything that's not a homestead. And so it's very hard to have any policy discernment with regards to tax rates because that is such a broad category with such different abilities to pay and needs. So it would be helpful in the future if we could create a more discerning system when we started working on that with 480, but we are not there yet.
We're getting a report back.
Yes.
Question, not comment. I've wondered this, and I've never been able to figure this out. What is the formula that determines the homestead piece versus the non-homestead piece? There's got to be some sort of underlying formula there that sets the two. But how are those two broken apart? And how does that work?
Do you mind clarifying what you mean by formula?
Well, you know, I mean, you look at the, you see the non-homestead property tax in line 2. Your sources, and then you see homestead, and you know that also has the property tax credit taken out of it. And we know that, I know that those three numbers need to add up to equal line 10, right? Is that correct?
So
No,
The-
well, that plus the
Total sources.
if I may interject here.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how those are set.
Yes.
How we determine what ratio becomes the homestead versus what ratio of that education payment becomes non-homestead.
Sure. So the education payment, I'll sort of start with the second part of your question and then go into the first part. The education payment is as much an appropriation as all of the other appropriations that we have listed out here in lines 10 through 25.
Okay.
So the education payment is not the appropriation that's funded by property taxes.
I guess maybe if I could rephrase my question, how does the amount that has to be raised through property taxes, how does that number, how is the ratio that's homestead versus not homestead determined?
Sure. So the short answer is, and you've heard, I know this is something I say in the committee all the time, it's a policy decision. The longer answer is we take all of the uses of the ed fund, we take out the non-property revenue sources, and then the remaining chunk is what needs to be filled by property taxes. How much of that is filled by homestead and how much of that is filled by non-homestead is determined by what the yields are that are set annually.
For the purposes of the December 1st letter, how do you do it?
For the purposes of the December 1st letter, we look at the average bill change for the homestead property tax and the non-homestead property tax. And we say the average bill change needs to be the same. So homestead average bill needs to increase by the same amount as non-homestead or decrease by the same amount. For FY25, the December 1st letter, that increase is 18.5%. So that's how we're seeing the breakdown. But getting back to Representative Odie's point, that doesn't need to be consistent.
Well, that's what I'm hearing you say. And so I'm wondering what happens if it's a little different than what it has been.
I would have to do the modeling,
Right.
which I can certainly do.
And not by tomorrow, but like we will get there on our journey. Representative Taylor, then Maslin, and then we're gonna finish actually understanding the outlook and then we can have a conversation.
At the risk of putting my foot in my mouth, my understanding is that it's an iterative process to do all this.
Right.
So that to answer Carl, you could calculate the homestead and see what that does to the non-homestead.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, we need to make these more level. So you change the amount that each one of those contributes and then you can adjust them. But it's an over and over iterative process that calculates that.
Yes.
Jim.
Yeah, saying the same thing, different words, I guess, is that the ratio so-called is a result of decisions we made in this. And it is not directive. How we do it, it's the result. We make our decisions on homestead, non-homestead, and as Kurt said, we sort of look at it. But we don't go from the ratio, what I would say, backwards. Right.
Thanks.
And the December 1st letter, the goal is to keep the average change the same. That's the mainstream.
So, Madam Chair, whatever happened to the original intention with the non-homestead tax, that would be stable for the sake of businesses, so they can anticipate that. And the one that fluctuated was the homestead.
I'm not aware of that.
It used to be a statute in state law. But I don't think it's there anymore.
I don't recall that. Yeah.
It was one of the original foundations of Act 60.
The original Act 60 set rates in statute, and we've been changing them every year in order to raise money to fill the ed fund. And I don't recall, but you may be right, that originally the non-homestead was static. Someone could, Janet may.
I think we're gonna pause all of our attempts at remembering things, and we will ask either Beth St. James or Kirby to look into that, do a little history of Act 60, if that's helpful. Okay. But
I brought my own.
we're not gonna, we probably won't go too deep on it, but we can look into that question. But I think all of us trying to like weave in our memory banks is not gonna get us where we need to go on that one. Shall can you go through the sources? I don't think we finished sources.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we're seeing in sources here, the non-property revenue sources that go into the education fund per statute are lines 3 through 8. We see those reflected over here, the estimates for fiscal year 25, but those are going to change with the latest revenue forecast coming up from the economists. And then we see the property tax estimates that are reflecting the December 1 modeling assumptions in lines 1A and 2. And we see the property tax credit, which is the current estimate of the property tax credit that needs to be paid out this year per the income yield that was set in the previous year.
And I'm just gonna, this might be more petty than I want to be, but if we had moved the purchase and use tax into the transportation fund, let's think about how much, what this would look like. Okay. Onwards to appropriations. Thank you, Scott.
So lines 10 through 25 are reflecting the appropriations that need to be paid out of the education fund. We see in line 10, the education payment. This is, you'll recall, the aggregated education spending, which is, if you recall, school districts, they've got their budgets. We take out the offsetting revenues of those budgets that remain offsetting revenues being things like categorical aid, tuition is paid into the district. The remainder is education spending. So that's what we're seeing here in education payment. The bulk of that is personnel costs. And then lines 11 through 19 are categorical aid. Most of this is formula driven. So I won't talk in too much detail about any specific numbers unless that's helpful.
Something we'll probably go into next week with school folks.
Sure. And I will just mention that some of these numbers were best estimates as of December 1st, also subject to change as better data comes in. You see a new line here, line 19. This is English Learners Services. This was put in Act 127, 2022. This is categorical aid for school districts that have few but some English learner students. And I guess I won't go into detail on any of the other appropriation lines unless that would be helpful. Are the chair has any interest? And then we move into sort of the flow of the dollars within the ed fund and how to interpret those. So we see the flow of dollars to or from additional reserves, to or from unreserved, unallocated. We see the stabilization reserve, which is traditionally kept at 5% of prior year net appropriations. So this modeling assumes that that the reserve is filled to its target of 55.6 million for FY25. We see that there is still the 9.1 million that was set aside last year as an additional reserve for future COLA provisions. And we see that you'll recall last year you set aside 13 million as a tax rate offset reserve and included in the language that the December 1 letter assumes that 13 million is put towards uniformly lowering tax rates. So this modeling assumes that 13 million is put towards lowering tax rates uniformly. And then, excuse me, and then you see that with all of this modeling, after it all shakes out, that there's 0.76, which is unreserved, unallocated on the bottom line. And that's really a reflection of, these are really big numbers we're working with. So to get a uniform change, that's as close as we can get to zero. So that is really diving in to the Ed Fund outlook.
That line 27 and the 27.5. There's some, it seems to me that should be zero, that at this point, with your projecting, it seems to me you should make your revenues equal your expenses. Is not what that's doing.
So that is comparing the two, the sources and the uses. However, you'll also see that we've got unreserved and unallocated funds from the prior year closeout that we're putting in as a revenue, so to speak. We also have the tax rate offset reserve that's flowing in there. So these lines, I kind of moved past them quickly because they're not as intuitive as some of the other lines in the Ed Fund. And so what you're really seeing, that zero you're looking to see, is really being captured on 39.
Okay.
And just another little plug to that annotated guide, it does spell out which lines are being subtracted within the Ed Fund outlook to get to all of the numbers in here.
What questions comes up for people now that aren't necessarily questions? Well, actually, I'm going to take that back. What questions do you have for Julia that you think she might be able to answer today? And then we can move to questions that Julia might be able to answer a future day, and then just broader questions that might be floating out here for all of us as we look at this. Yeah.
Organizational sort of structural question. I've had you walk me through this where you do the these are the, we add these and we subtract these and we get these, and it doesn't flow chronologically. Is there a reason that this is all in the order that it is, or that there isn't an additional version of it that just puts it all in the sort of formula that gets to the zero at the bottom?
This is a document that's been used by the legislature for many years that were prior to me arriving here. So I don't know why it was set up the way that it was set up. I think that the way to think about it is like sources. This is what we've got coming in. Appropriations, this is what we've got going out. Allocation of revenues, here's kind of what's going on within the fund. Then we got the stabilization reserve, and then sort of just tying everything together. That's a good question.
I mean, some of these are fixed and some of them we adjust, and it's just there's no intuitive way other than just having looked at it forever to know that.
Or having an annotated guide.
Yeah.
I just always thought of 27 through 39, it's like, that's just something that made some accountant happy somewhere.
Makes me happy.
That's important.
Any other questions for Julia? Okay, thanks, Julia.
Yeah.
So big questions that I have right now that I'm hoping that we're going to dive into next week is essentially we know why the grand list growth looks the way it is, right? Like we have a pretty good sense of that, and there aren't sort of immediate levers for that at all. Property values are going up. We've talked a lot about reappraisals last year. We don't need to rehash that conversation. And so the other big piece is why is spending. Why are districts asking for so much more money this year? What does that look like? Why are budgets being warned so much higher? And are there levers within that? Things the Agency of Education could be doing that they're not. Ways that we can discuss this with districts. What are the resources that are needed? And so that's sort of what I I'm hoping we're gonna dive into next week. So, special ed, you know, we had, Act 173 that changed a lot of special ed. Is that causing some of the increase in special education costs, or is that money being moved elsewhere? And that's why we're not seeing it. Those kinds of questions is what I'm wondering about to cover next week, but I'm wondering what other questions people have. The mechanisms around the 5% threshold, definitely a big question that needs some solving. Yeah.
Just, I sense that school construction is coming back alive. And it would be good to answer questions from constituents saying, well, could you explain to me, now that we've had a hiatus over construction for a decade, how that will be handled and integrated with the ongoing year-to-year operating burdens that we are familiar with? Because I think this will be the beginning of a somewhat new environment if we're getting serious about systematically renewing the capital stock of school buildings.
And something I've heard but have not verified yet, and I hope we can verify, is how much of this year's education spending is actually school construction dollars that aren't sort of as transparently school construction dollars. Other questions, folks?
I have heard anecdotally, or maybe through a more official channel, that it seems plausible that the agency of ed is not pulling down all the federal dollars they could to support schools. And I would love if someone could talk to us about how we could address that either here or outside of this committee.
Thanks.
Yeah, concerning school construction and any number of other things that are new pressures on the budget. I'm wondering, and this is a long around the elbow, kind of stuff like that, but when I was in transportation with Richie Westman and we came up with these PAYGO bonds to fund transportation, it was sort of an innovative approach to raising money that didn't count against the on totals. I can't remember the term, but we'll get to it. There may be some interesting ways, innovative ways to raise money without impacting our state bonding capacity, per se. Where we raise money, pay as you go, we can have a better description of this. I mean, Chris Roop would be good, or somebody who worked through this last year. But anyway, there may be some different ways to raise money for school construction, which I agree is really quite necessary, that aren't the traditional raise the tax, pay out the money.
And there was a school construction task force this summer, and we will hear an update from them. So, Odie, did you ever? Would you like to speak?
Yes, sorry. Thank you. Transportation, I'd like to hear how that works. It's a categorical grant. I'd like to hear how that works. I had, years ago, a long conversation with someone who was very upset with the way she saw buses going in Florida, school district buses going back and forth, and thought that maybe transportation dollars were not being used. Well, so I haven't got a clue about that. And then I see there's a bill that was introduced in the Senate today, has to do with authorizing the treasurer to issue bonds to finance flood recovery, mitigation, and preparedness measures. And so I thought, well, what about bonds for school construction in that way? I don't know, that's a and then you asked the question, I think, Julia, is the state agency of education pulling down all the money it could? And I'm wondering whether the school boards are able to pull down as much money as they should. And what can the state offer for help so that happens? I really, which gets to the underlying issue of whatever it costs for either consultant, it always ends up being $100,000, right? Or someone maybe, if it looks like there is, then maybe we need to advocate for a position at AOE that would pull down far more money than it would cost the state to fund.
And we've done that in other places in the state government. It's worked really well. Any other? Yes.
Not that they're necessarily common narratives, but would like to really kind of better understand how the adjustment weights are affecting budgets and like what are overweighted, if there are any trends across overweighted schools and how they're adjusting to reduce taxing capacity and underweighted adjusting to increase taxing capacity, what people are doing with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have one thing that's challenging about all of this is how little, because the Agency of Education didn't succeed in moving to a common charter of accounts across districts, we have very little transparency on what is actually happening in any of these budgets, which would give us a lot of insight into some of these questions we have. So I just want to sort of, I'm forewarning myself that we might not actually have answers to all of these questions and still have to make some really difficult policy decisions about them. One question I also have, which is a little bit of what we talked about, was shifting the homestead, non-homestead, what happens is, at different rates, who is paying and who is impacted, and making sure we're like very clear on that question. And if anyone has not read the study that came out of the income-based education task force from last summer. Is that what it was called?
I can forward it to Sorcia.
Oh, okay.
Your timing is right, correct.
Okay. But whatever, do you have any idea what that task force
No,
was?
I put a lot of words in it though, it was pretty long.
Okay. Sorcia can send it out. Not as, and I'm not bringing it up as a way of saying that this is a move that we should make. I was much less convinced at the end of the task force's work than I was at the beginning of the task force's work. But there's a lot of information about what happens when you sort of push in this place on the bubble, how it impacts other people and other taxpayers. And so was really helpful for me in understanding how different pieces of the system impact each other. So I recommend reviewing that sometime in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
I would love to hear what has happened over the years with the way that the teachers' health benefits have been taken out of the hands of local school boards, and what has happened as a result. What's happened with the costs for this?
Healthcare costs.
Healthcare costs.
Okay. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay. I think we're. Peter, yes.
Just, I think particularly this year, and again, it won't be reflected in some of the calculations till next, but I sense that the diversity of experience amongst towns is actually increasing. By that, I mean, one assumes or one thinks, because it's frequently repeated, that grand list values around the state have gone up because of the hot housing market. That's true probably of most, but not all. Add to which, and here I'm getting parochial, some communities like mine have actually seen a collapse in grand list because the buildings were destroyed and abatements are skyrocketing. So I think one has to be very careful about the levers going by majority assumptions, because some of those levers may really do some damage to folks who are in a minority in terms of either the movement of incomes, the movement of housing values, the total grand list, all the levers that Julia indicated are part of one of those or more of those lines. I should just warn that diversity makes our job not easier, but more complicated.
And the equalization study actually just came out, so we'll go through that, and that's an important place to be having that conversation. I also have a lot of curiosity about what happened when ESSER funds went away. We have a lot of schools, a lot of kids throughout the state with really high needs, partly because of the pandemic, partly because of the state of the world in general. And those kids still have those needs now that ESSER money has gone away. And those are, in some cases, systems that other state systems in an ideal world would have picked that up and maybe haven't. And so that's something I think we need to understand better too. And the Education Committee will spend some time on that. Okay, I think we are done for the day. Yeah. Enjoy your moments while you have them. They'll go away soon. And